Welcome back again to the channel. Today I'm joined with
His husband.
he's my husband and
Prince.
Oh, let me tell us, my brother.
today we are going to be checking out facts about slavery never mentioned in school by Thomas Sowell. We
Yeah.
are so excited for this one, but if you're new here, please do not forget to like, subscribe and share this video. So let's get right into today's reaction. Untold facts about slavery.
Wow.
The instrumental use of the history of slavery today also underlies the claim that slavery grew out of racism. For most of its long history, which includes most of the history of the human race, slavery was largely not the enslavement of racially different people,
growing up,
for the simple
I
reason
thought
that
slavery
only
was
in
in
recent
Africa.
centuries
Yeah,
has
me
either the
too.
technology or the wealth existed to go to another continent to get slaves and transport them en masse across an ocean. People were enslaved because they were vulnerable, not because of how they looked. The peoples of the Balkans were enslaved by fellow Europeans, as well as by the peoples of the Middle East, for at least 6 centuries before the first African was brought to the Western Hemisphere. Before the modern era,
6 centuries. That's like
600
600
years.
years
Whoa.
before they start bringing slaves from Africa. But do you know all this while when we hear of slavery, I actually thought slavery started from Africa, like originated
No,
from this
no,
place.
come on.
You know the way we are being told about racism, like
In the Bible,
racial,
No,
there-
even in the
racial.
Bible,
in the
there
Bible,
was
there was
slaves.
slaves.
So that's why I can say, just that,
They took it personal. When
yeah, when it came to the African version of it,
yeah, when they saw
Mm.
blacks, they stopped using white people as slaves
exactly.
and focus on only black. So now there's not a problem. Now it's a color problem.
Racial
Because
stuff.
before it wasn't like that. It was like anybody can be a slave.
Yeah.
by and large, Europeans enslaved other Europeans, Asians enslaved other Asians, Africans enslaved other Africans.
Oh, we
And
Africans
the
done
indigenous
this to
peoples of the
ourselves.
Western Hemisphere enslaved other indigenous peoples of the Western Hemisphere. Slavery was not based on race, much less on theories about race. Only relatively late in history did enslavement across racial lines occur on such a scale as to promote an ideology of racism that outlasted the institution of slavery itself.
Yeah.
Wherever a separate people were enslaved, they were disdained or despised, whether they were different by country, religion, caste, race, or tribe. In East Africa, the Maasai were feared slave raiders, and other African tribes, either alone or in conjunction with Arabs, enslaved their more vulnerable neighbors. As late as 1891, it was reported that Manyuema slavers had demoralized surrounding tribes, destroying crops, and famine reigned everywhere. Even in the early 20th century, Abyssinians were still raiding other Africans and carrying off slaves. It was 1922 before the British had gained sufficient control in Tanganyika to stamp out slavery there. Arabs were the leading slave raiders in East Africa, ranging over an area larger than all of Europe. The total number of slaves exported from East Africa during the 19th century has been estimated to be at least 2 million. The form in which the story of slavery has reached most people today.
That's a lot.
I guess actually, I know why the blacks took it personal. 2 million in a certain century.
That's a lot.
Has been along
That's
the
too
lines of the
much.
best-selling book and widely watched television miniseries Roots by Alex Haley. Challenged on the historical accuracy of Roots, Haley said, "I tried to give my people a myth to live by." This instrumental use of history, or purported history, is open to the same objections as other instrumental myth-making. Despite the impression created by Roots, during the era of the massive slave trade from West Africa, a white man was more likely to catch malaria in Africa than to catch slaves himself. The average life expectancy of a white man in the interior of sub-Saharan Africa at that time was less than 1 year. By and large, men from Europe or the Western Hemisphere came to the coasts
Wait,
of
what did you
Africa,
just say? The life
bought their
expectancy?
slaves,
Yeah.
and
They say
left.
Your first can die. So
1 year.
one day, malaria. So the environment wasn't favoring them.
As soon as possible.
That was horrible.
Even so, the death rates among the white crews of the ships carrying slaves to the Western Hemisphere were as high as the death rates among the slaves themselves. It was only much later, after quinine and other medical measures enabled Europeans to survive where there were tropical diseases, was it possible for them to invade Africa in force and establish empires there. But by then, the Atlantic slave trade had already been ended. During the era of that trade, Africa was largely ruled by Africans, who established the conditions under which slave sales took place. The crew of a slave ship was in no position to defy African rulers and their armies by going out across the land and capturing people willy-nilly. The stronger African peoples captured and enslaved the weaker peoples.
Yeah.
The same pattern found over the centuries in Europe, Asia, the Western Hemisphere, and Polynesia. In Nyasaland, the Ngoni and Yao swaggered over and terrorized other tribes. In Uganda, the Baganda made life miserable for their neighbors. And the Nyoro and Hima of Anko enslaved Toro women and children. The Tutsi dominated the Hutu in Rwanda, the Maasai lorded it over the Kikuyu and Kamba, and the latter, in turn, held the Indorobo in a kind of serfdom. It was precisely the fact that Europeans, except for the Portuguese, seldom participated in the raids that captured and enslaved Africans that enabled most people in Europe and the Americas to remain oblivious to the traumatic experience that this was, with some Africans committing suicide to avoid capture and wives being whipped as they tried to cling to their husbands or children. Historian David Breon Davis pointed out that Europeans had little contact with the actual process of enslavement, and that as late as 1721, the Royal African Company asked its agents to investigate the modes of enslavement in the interior. Europeans typically saw only the end results, enslaved people being offered for sale on the coast. It was much the same story in the Ottoman Empire, where those who bought slaves had no idea what these slaves had been through before. The unique position of the Western world in the history, and especially the destruction of slavery, need not imply that there was unanimity within the West on this institution. In addition to whites who defended the enslavement of Africans on racial grounds, or who opposed general emancipation on social grounds, there were many whites, and even blacks, who defended slavery as a matter of self-interest as slave owners. Although most black owners of slaves in the United States were only nominal owners of members of their own families, there were thousands of other blacks in the antebellum South who were commercial slave owners, just like their white counterparts. An estimated one-third of the free persons of color in New Orleans were slave owners, and thousands of these slave owners volunteered to fight for the Confederacy during the Civil War. Black slave owners were even more common in the Caribbean. In short, there were many defenders of slavery in the West, even in the 19th century. And outside the West, slavery was too widely accepted to require defense. No other nation ended slavery in the same way as the United States did, and few ended it after so short a struggle, as history is measured.
As the United States did, I thought slavery was actually ended by the UK, the British people.
No, I think what he said there is no one ended it the way the
Okay,
US
yeah.
ended. He never said they were the first. They just said no one. I feel like maybe they fought more
Yeah, they fought more.
over it than any other.
I thought it was a civil war or something like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was.
The West and the South, something like that.
Definitely.
How and why did slavery end in most of the world? There were two major processes. Over the centuries, as more and more territories around the world consolidated into nation-states with their own armies and navies, raiding those territories to capture and enslave the people who lived within them became more hazardous in itself, and also risked military retaliation against the countries from which the raiders came. Thus, more and more peoples became off-limits to slave raiders over time. Put differently, the areas which remained subject to slave raiding over the centuries were primarily those where the people lived in smaller or weaker societies. Such societies continued to exist where it was difficult, for geographic or other reasons, to consolidate large areas under one government. This was true of the Balkans, the backwaters of Asia, and much of sub-Saharan Africa. By the early modern era, sub-Saharan Africa, with its numerous and severe geographic handicaps, was one of the last remaining areas from which vast numbers of people could be enslaved.
The fact that actually that we African had in hand
Yes.
in enslaving our people still baffles me.
And at the end of the day, they made it feel like
It was just the white man
yeah, they
invaded
then
and everything.
but we played the
played the role.
primary role, secondary and tertiary role in slave trade.
Because if you heard what he said there, it was like the raiders could not actually enter
Yeah.
and pick people.
And even with so much research, even when the UK and the American fought so hard to end slavery, the blacks were still selling slaves.
Yes, they never stopped.
They never stopped selling slaves.
It's a business. They're only for a different buyer.
They never stopped. It was when they now saw that the people that are selling it to have no longer is illegal in their side. That was when they capped down.
Yeah, because
And they even actually upgraded the system. They call it now what's the word again? It's not trafficking or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you understand?
Human trafficking, yeah.
They deceive you and tell you that there is a job offer or something like that, and then when you come, they turn it into something else. Because that's another form of slavery.
Either harvest or organ. I think it.
Modern slavery.
Oh yeah, I think there was a form of slavery in the African country still going on.
Even ongoing as we're
Yeah, as
talking,
we're
people
talking
are
right now.
in that siege
That's
of
it.
slavery.
Let's put an end to slavery,
First of
especially
all,
between Africans. Come on, we are Africans. We should be united
Not just Africans, all over the world.
all over the world.
We are humans.
No, I know, but I'm
Because
saying because Africans own their own is too much.
Even the
Yeah.
writer of Amazing Grace, right? According to the story we were told in church, he was actually a slave buyer.
Oh, I
So when
didn't
he
know.
came, you're not paying attention. So when he came to Africa to like buy slaves, like he took a closer look into like the people he was coming to buy. They had all the body parts he had, and even for the women, the same thing his wife had. And then he didn't get the stuff, and he went back, and I think probably he's one of sorry.
Sorry.
He's part of those people that fought for slavery to Cuba on all those silence fighters, and then he gave his life to Christ and wrote the song "Amazing Grace," how and everything like that. But in that category, like you, even the people coming to buy and people selling the slaves, like looking at these people, they are humans just as you are, and you are selling them, forcefully taking them from their families. Like it's
How would you feel if someone take you from your home? By the time you check that, like there's a saying that goes, what you don't like, don't do it to another
the next
person.
Yeah.
And I am very sure that nobody loves to be a slave. Nobody.
captivity.
Nobody wants to be in captivity. They decide for you the time you eat. They decide for you when you work. They come on. What you don't like, don't do it to another person, please. Let's live in peace and harmony.
Yeah.
Can't we just do that?
Even the people trafficking other people, would they like to be trafficked? People harvesting people organ. Then if you like
The
so much,
conditions are not
give us
nice.
organs. Like it's not nice.
Let us know what you think about this video down below. Please do not forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. We love you guys, and bye.